I'd like to begin by telling you about some research results we have, some important breakthroughs from our research laboratories in Southern California. We have the answer to the question you've been asking for years. If you're going to learn another language, what's the first sentence you should learn? Any ideas? No. What's your name? Do you speak English? Where's the bathroom? No. Any others? We got it. How are you? Close, not quite. What am I saying? Yes. Where's the coffee? That's a good one for me. We have the answer. We've interviewed thousands of people, and we definitely have the answer. Here it is. My friend will pay. I can say that in 15 languages now. Okay, let's get serious. I want to talk about, first, another research breakthrough that is a good introduction to the talk today. It does not have to do with schools, revival and preservation of heritage languages, none of those things. And looking around, I think it'll be useful for you in about 30 or 40 years. You don't need this now, but it's going to be important later, so put it in a file, okay? I'm very concerned with the question of aging, getting old. I'll tell you what happened, okay? This started, I was getting on this bus, and there's a regular fare and a senior fare, and they said, senior fare, very cheap, show ID. So I got on, I took out my driver's license, and I handed it to the person, and he looked at me and he said, oh, that's okay, never mind. They should be told, no matter how old the person looks, always ask for the ID, okay? Here you are, Sonny. Anyway, so I've been interested in aging, and the thing about aging that has me most interested is dementia, senility. Someone once said, don't worry about senility. When it comes, you won't know, all right? Another person said, senility means you can hide your own Easter eggs. Okay, yeah. But I'm worried about it because it goes in my family. On my father's side, on the Krashen side, everybody on my father's side developed dementia when they were 75 years old. My father did, his sisters, his two sisters, and his two brothers. Everybody got it. 75 is the magic age. I am now 76. But I read at the 80-year-old level, so it's okay. Okay. Anyway, so it hasn't happened yet, at least I don't think so. But my way of solving my problems, dealing with them, is to read research. So I read all these papers, and I write a paper on it. I make it complex, impossible to understand, and I usually publish it in an obscure journal. So that's what I did with dementia. And my research, I came across 3 findings, which I put in the paper. Number 1, if you want to avoid dementia, be bilingual. Isn't that nice? Okay. There's a problem that we all have as we get older called executive control. Executive control means losing your place, getting distracted, not knowing what you're doing. You wind up in the kitchen in the morning and you don't know how you got there, right? You're on your way to do something else. This happens to everybody when we get interrupted. As you get older, it gets worse and worse. And where was I, right? What was I talking about? That kind of thing. And in dementia, it's very, very serious. Bilinguals do not suffer from this problem anywhere near as much as everybody else. This is research done by Ellen Bialystok, who comes from the York University in Toronto. She found that children who grow up bilingual, who are used to switching languages as they get older, are much better on executive control. That's pretty good. In fact, Bialystok had a big article, a big interview in the New York Times. It was very well done, so people know about this. Bilingualism is good for the brain. It delays dementia. Number 2, read a lot. People my age who read a lot have the same verbal memory as someone in their 30s who doesn't read a lot. Number 3, coffee. Wow. 3 cups of coffee, freshly brewed, will delay dementia 6, 7, 8 years, about the same as the other factors. This is a research result done by several different laboratories who came to the same conclusion independently. Coffee? How nice. Thank you, Nay. Oh, domo. Okay. Friends forever. Thank you, dear. I take back all the things I said about you. Okay.
So I only put 1 if you need more.
No, that's fine. That's excellent. Oh, gosh. How kind. I like to, went to the doctor 3 weeks ago for my checkup. He told me my blood type was Starbucks. I like coffee so strong it wakes up the neighbors. Oh gosh. Johann Sebastian Bach said, without coffee, I'm like a piece of dried up goat meat. I can pretty much, relate to that. Anyway, 3 cups of freshly brewed coffee will significantly delay dementia. Don't ask me about decaf. I refuse to look at the research on decaf. I am offended by decaf. For me, decaf is like kissing your sister. I mean, it's okay, but they're not really the same thing. Notice you can do all 3 of these things at the same time. Isn't that nice? You can sit down, have a nice cup of coffee, read a book in another language, the fountain of youth. Well, I tried to spread this idea around. Dr. Beniko Mason, who's going to be speaking to you in a couple of days, we have a mutual friend, Kyung-Suk Cho, who I talked to yesterday, and she has a history with us of simply coming up with lots of good ideas all the time. So when I came out with this idea about coffee, she said, why don't you write to Starbucks? Tell them about it. So good. The reason she thought it was a good idea is that those days Starbucks put these messages on the cups, like protect the planet, resist evil, don't bomb North Korea and all that. Okay, all the other things. By the way, my remarks are politically biased. And if you are offended, it will get much worse as the day goes on, okay? I didn't write to Mr. Trump this morning. I didn't have time, but usually I answer him back. My first comment on Trump, when he first took office, he tweeted, "We must eliminate evil from the United States." I wrote and said, "I agree. I'm looking forward to your impeachment." Anyway, and the one I've been doing all the time, whenever he says anything about taxes and health care, I write, "Oh, I know what you mean. Take from the needy and give to the greedy." I want to get that around, okay? So anyway, back to these things. Kyung-Suk said if you send this to Starbucks, they might put it on their cups. And they might talk about coffee as keeping you young. And also, maybe we can score some points for our team. Maybe they talk about reading and languages, all right, all for free. So I sent them a note. I said, you might be interested in this. They wrote me back. Another mutual friend of ours, Ashley Hastings, says their response was a case of corporate dementia. They wrote back and said, "We are not interested in new economic ventures at this time." No, I said, here's the article. It's public domain. Use it as you like. Anyway, still trying to spread the word, and that's a good introduction to what we're talking about today. Drinking coffee, talking about reading, talking about language acquisition in general. What I'd like to do to begin the talk is to give you a brief idea of what we've been doing for the last 40 years. Oh my goodness. Okay. How do I write things up there? In the old days, when I was young, I want to write things. We used to have things called chalkboards. Do you remember chalkboards? They've gone away just like phone booths and tape recorders. Nobody under 40 knows what they are, okay? But I love chalkboards. So we're now going to replicate what a chalkboard could do for a device that probably cost $5,000, okay? Anyway, I want to review for you what our work has been for the last 40 years. It's been very exciting. And our work begins with a crucial distinction, vocabulary word, and it's on your handout, acquisition and learning. We think people have two different ways of getting better in another language. You can learn language, you can acquire language, and they're very, very different things. Acquisition, we sometimes call the natural way, and a synonym for acquisition is picking up a language. I was in Mexico for a few weeks, and I picked up some Spanish that really means you acquired it. It's called the natural way. It happens subconsciously. While it's happening, you don't know that it's happening. You think you're having a nice conversation. You think you're reading a book. At the same time, you might be acquiring. Second, once you're finished acquiring, you're not always aware that anything has happened. The knowledge is represented subconsciously in your brain. Let me give you an example of that. What happens to you when you hear someone make a mistake in English? Has this ever happened to you? Of course, okay. When you hear someone make a mistake in English, can you always tell exactly what rule was broken? No, of course not. I can't either. Most of the time I can tell you. I'd say about, in my case, 95% of the time I can tell you. But the other 5% of the time, 10%, I have a feeling something was wrong, but I can't quite put my finger on it. Are you familiar with that? Please say yes. Yes, sir. No, that's right. Okay. That's acquisition. By the way, just so you won't feel bad that you can't tell every time when a rule was broken, as I told you, I can't either. And I have, believe it or not, a PhD in grammar. And I can't always tell what rule was broken. We think the ability to subconsciously pick up language is with us our entire lives. It never goes away. Children acquire first language, children acquire second language. The ability to subconsciously pick up language doesn't disappear at puberty, doesn't disappear when you get your ARP card. I think you only have to be 21 to get an ARP card now, okay? Oh, ARP, I gotta tell you what's new. Anyway, it's always there. The language acquisition device never shuts off. Isn't that nice? We can always acquire language. I'll tell you the story as we go on of a buddy of mine, Steve Kaufman, who speaks 15 languages. Wow, and he's the real thing. He says he did 8 of them between age 61 and 71. Jerry, when we get to be 61, we're going to work. We're going to start all these languages, okay? Okay, do we have this going now?
Yes, you got your chalk?
I don't have any, yeah, what do I do?
Your fingertip.
Okay,
So whatever you want to draw on it, just do it.
just do it. Did that work? Oh my goodness. So how do I get rid of it?
You do the garbage can.
It's a garbage can.
Do I just erase it?
Well, let's leave that up for a while. I like that. This is true, by the way. Is that mystical or what? E to the I pi equals -1. This is amazing. Okay. Ah, math, I love it. Okay, well, now I garbage. Oh, okay. Very good. Okay, so that's the first idea, acquisition and learning. The second research breakthrough we had turns out to be very, very useful. We think everybody, children, adults, all acquire the rules of language in a certain order. Some rules come early, some come in the middle, some come late. For example, with English, and this particular example is true of English as a first language and English as a second language. This guy, the ing marker, John is playing the violin. That's one of the earliest grammatical markers to come. It's early in first language, it's early in second language. This one, the third person singular S, he plays baseball. That one comes late. For children, there could be 6 months to a year between the two. For adults, the third person singular may never come. We know people who speak English quite well, and they blow that one. A couple of amazing, interesting facts about this. First of all, the order of acquisition doesn't depend on simple to complicated. A lot of rules that seem very easy are acquired late. A lot of rules that look very complicated, we can't describe them, they come early. Number 2, you can't change it, no matter what. This explains a lot of problems we all had in our language classes when we were in school. They try to get you to acquire these things early, and you just can't do it. You have to wait till its time has come. What was it, Gallo wine? It'll be ready when its time has come. So, and it's not simple to complex. You cannot change the rule. It's an invariable order. The case I really enjoy talking about is a former colleague of mine at USC. We worked together in the late 1970s. He was my expert on English grammar, colleague with the next office. His name was Matt Shibatani, and his native language was Japanese. And when he spoke English, he had a very slight accent. Now, Matt knew more about grammar than anybody I knew personally. Whenever I needed some information about the research, rules, he knew them all. Now, Matt Shibatani, PhD, linguist, made mistakes on the third person singular. He has known this his entire life. He probably knew more about grammar than anybody in the city of Los Angeles, and that shows that knowing the rule consciously doesn't help you do it fluidly. We'll come back to that, okay? You cannot change it. It doesn't depend on simple to complex. So I know what you're thinking. You're thinking the same thing I was thinking in 1975 when I gave this standing room crowd-only speech at a major conference. That's because there were only 10 chairs in the room and 12 people came. I said, we know the order of acquisition. Let's teach along the order. Early ones first. Turns out that's wrong. And I'll tell you why in a few minutes. Moving on. The next hypothesis has to do with how we actually use acquisition and learning when we try to speak another language. Oh, I think I just sent this to Donald Trump. Okay, here's what we think is going on. Acquisition and learning do different things for us. The easy way of thinking about this, by the way, I'll tell you what this means, is to think about what happens to you when you try to speak a language that you don't know very well, a language you're kind of low intermediate in. Have you been in this situation? Just curious, how many of you? Okay, for me, my intermediate language is Spanish. I can have a conversation, reasonably comfortable, but there's a lot I don't understand. Sometimes, I can't find the right word, all that stuff. It's very interesting to be at the intermediate stage. So when I'm speaking Spanish, here's what happens. The sentence pops into my mind from what I've acquired. Then, if I want to, I can pause before I say the sentence, think of the rules I learned in school, and make corrections. So here's learning up here. Learning acts as a monitor. Just before you say the sentence, you think of the rules, you make corrections. Sometimes you say it, you realize you make a mistake, you go back and correct. This is a serious research hypothesis. We gathered the evidence for this in the late 1970s, and it's all in a book. If you want to read the book, it is available. This is where I hustle my books, right? It's available for free on my website, okay? sdkrashen.com. Operators are standing by. Anyway, you can download that book. The title of the book, 1981, Second Language Acquisition and Second Language Learning. The subtitle is The Cure for Insomnia. If you can't sleep, I recommend my book. You'll be unconscious in about 5 minutes. For people like me, crazy people like me, I think this is so interesting. But for normal people, I'm not so sure. But the research is there. Let me just, rather than go through the research, let me tell you what my thoughts were in 1975, before your mother was born, okay? When I first realized this is what was going on. What are the practical implications? Here's what I decided then. We have acquisition, we have learning, they do different things. Acquisition, I decided then, gives us our fluency. Learning gives us our accuracy. Isn't that nice? 2 components, 2 contributions. Obviously, we want both. We want our students to speak easily and fluently, but we also want the grammar to be there. It turns out that's wrong. It's all wrong. What the research has been telling me since 1975, nearly every day, the action is here. Acquisition gives us fluency and accuracy. Even for the most analytic thinking, grammar-loving adult, it's nearly all acquisition. For the child, it's 100%. Let me tell you this, no one was more disappointed to discover this than me. I told you a few minutes ago, I have a PhD in grammar. Until 1975, grammar was my life. I love grammar. I can't tell you how much I love grammar. Have you ever opened a good grammar book and look at the verb conjugations? I think they're beautiful. My idea of a good time is to find a grammar of a language I don't know, see how they do the future tense. Yes. When my intellectual hero, I don't know if you've heard of this guy, Noam Chomsky. Oh, yeah. Okay. From 1973 to 1975, I was director of an English as a second language program in New York. And it was at Queens College, I told my teachers, here are the universals of language teaching. Explain the rules clearly. Correct errors. That's what I said. I wrote several papers saying that. They were published in the best, most prestigious journals. They're all wrong. A lot of people think that was my best work. Anyway, you're listening to a convert today, and it's the research that's changed my position. There's no way out. It's acquisition that makes things work. It's very, very hard to use this monitor. I want to tell you how hard it is. Much harder than we ever thought. We have overestimated how much people can handle grammar. There are 3 conditions that have to be met if you want to use grammar, and they are daunting conditions, very, very challenging. Number 1, you got to know the rule. You got to know the rule. This is really hard. Let me give you an example. Take your pen and draw a circle on your page about the size of a large coin. Please do this with me. Let's say, this is with mathematics talking, this is a set of all the rules of English. We're going to use English as an example because English has been studied more than any other language. We know more about English than any language. This is all the rules. Let's say we go to the world's greatest syntactician. We go visit Professor Chomsky himself. And we say, Professor Chomsky, how many rules do you know of English? Now, Chomsky knows more about English than anyone alive. He knows more about English than anyone who has ever lived. That's what his team does. They look for universal principles by intensive study of languages. But if you ask him, how many rules do you know? He would say, he's very modest, we've only discovered fragments. But let's give him a lot of credit. Let's say Professor Chomsky and his colleagues know about this many rules of English. Do a circle inside your circle. We call this in math a proper subset. This is the number of rules, the percentage of rules that Chomsky knows. Let's say now we go to what we call professional grammarians. These are people who read the works of Chomsky, study the works of the syntacticians, and they write grammar books. They don't know as many rules as Chomsky, because Chomsky's discovering new rules all the time. But these people know a lot of rules. Draw a circle representing all the rules they know. Do this yourself. Give them a lot of credit. Can you do that? Draw a circle? Okay. Number 4. Let's say we ask grammar teachers. The best, most dedicated grammar teachers draw a circle representing the number of rules they know. Now, they don't know as many as the grammarians or as Chomsky, but they know a lot. Let's give them credit. Next, all the rules the most dedicated grammar teachers teach. See where I'm going? They don't teach all the rules they know. Can't possibly. Next, the number of rules the most hardworking students understand. They don't understand all the rules we give them in class. Next, all the rules the best students remember. The little dot you have in the middle is the limit of the conscious grammar for our very best students. We have overestimated how much people can learn about grammar. Well, the next issue then is, if acquisition is more important than learning, how do we acquire language? How does it happen? Let me begin the discussion by making an outrageous statement. In my opinion, we all acquire language the same. We all acquire language the same. This is an outrageous statement. You should be offended by this statement, because those of us in education like to emphasize how our students are different, not how they're the same. School pushes uniformity, and every teacher you run into says, this makes life impossible, because kids are different. They have different interests, different abilities. They want different things. Oh, great joke. Gary Mulder, this amazing comedian. My wife and I heard him 10 years ago. He was fronting warm-up act for Johnny Mathis. We heard Johnny Mathis in Las Vegas 10 years. Oh, that's another lecture. It was so exciting. Anyway, Gary Mulder was the front man. He had these great jokes. He says, my grandpa told me everybody wants something different. If everybody wanted the same thing, everyone would be after your grandma. So we all want to. Nevertheless, there are some things we all do the same. Let me give you some examples. Digestion. We all digest food the same. Put in your mouth, down your stomach. That's how it works in Africa, Asia, North America, South America, everywhere in the world. The visual system is the same for everyone in the world. It's always the occipital lobe in the back of the brain. It's never in the front of the brain. It's never in the side of the brain. It's never in the elbow. And language acquisition is the same. And rather than just talk about it, I'd like to show you. I'd like to take just a couple of minutes and do some sample language lessons. Before I do that, though, I need your permission. Is that okay? Some language lessons? Do you mind? It's okay? Lots of enthusiasm. Let me tell you what just happened, in case you didn't see. The people in the back thought it was a good idea. So, sure. Way over there. Yeah, okay. Not much reaction from this table, okay? What goes through your mind when this expert comes, says, language lesson, crosses the line of blood in the sand, comes down from the podium, and comes right up to where you're sitting? What goes through your mind? Oh no, he's gonna call on me. I'm gonna have to say something. I'll make a mistake, I'll be humiliated. Come on, you're all grown-ups. And still the idea of a language lesson in public makes you at least a little bit nervous. What does this mean? In my opinion, it means we're doing something fundamentally wrong, something fundamentally unnatural, the way we teach language. It's not your fault if you felt a little anxious. I would feel the same way. I'm going to give you the lessons anyway, but I'm going to go back up there. Sorry to frighten you. I know how it is. I'm going to give you 2 lessons. I'll use a language that some of you have heard before. Maybe some of you studied it in school. I'll give you 2 lessons, and you can tell me which of the two you like better. Very short. Lesson number 1. Wir werden jetzt anfangen, Deutsch zu lernen. Und ich möchte im Voraus sagen, dass nach meiner Meinung Deutsch ist eine sehr schöne Sprache. Und ich hoffe, dass Sie alle sehr viel Erfolg mit Deutsch haben werden. What do you think? Good lesson so far? Do you think if I kept talking like that, you'd pick up German? How about if I repeated it? Would that help? How about if I said it louder? Thank you. That would be good. Someone said slow down. Are there any German speakers here? Well, if they're, okay, good. You're my witnesses. That was pretty slow, okay? It wasn't the problem. I know. I'll write it on the board. I'll write it on the overhead. I'll erase every 5th word. You guess what the word is. None of those things matter. None of those things mean anything. Here's lesson number 2. Das ist meine Hand. Verstehen Sie das? Hand, ja? Sagen Sie ja. Ja, gut. Das ist mein Kopf. Kopf. Verstehen Sie Kopf, ja? Also Kopf. 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 Ist gut, ja? Ja. Hier ist Mr. Spock. Mr. Spock hat zwei Ohren. Verstehen Sie das? Ohren, okay. Also Mr. Spock, ja, sehr gut. Augen. Verstehen Sie Augen? Ja, Augen. Wie viele Augen? 1, 2, 3 Augen. Ist das richtig? Ja, 3 Augen? Ja? Nein, wir haben nur 2 Augen. 2 Augen, also. Mund. Verstehen Sie Mund? Ja. Und hier ist eine Zigarette, ja? Nein. Zigaretten sind nicht gut. If you understood lesson number 2, not every word, but more or less, I did everything necessary to teach you German. I will now share with you the most important concept I have learned about language, the best kept secret in the profession. We acquire language in one way and only one way. Here it is. When we understand it. That's it. We acquire language when we understand it. When we understand what people tell us, not how they say it, but what they say, and when we understand what we read. We call this comprehensible input. Comprehensible input has been the last resort in the language teaching profession. We tried everything else. We've tried making kids talk, grammar instruction, group therapy, the computer. We've tried everything else. The only thing that counts is comprehensible input. Let me share with you some mystical, amazing facts about language acquisition. I just want to see if Donald's written me back. No. My goal is with Donald Trump is to be blocked. I want to be like Stephen King. It would increase my street credibility if I got blocked by Donald Trump. I think it'd be good for my career. I'm working on it. Anyway, this has been the last resort in the language acquisition. Okay, there I was. 3 amazing facts. 3 amazing mystical facts about language acquisition. Amazing mystical fact number 1. Language acquisition is not hard work. In fact, it's pleasant. All you had to do was watch me make a few silly jokes on the overhead, and you acquired a little German. And he's waiting for you outside. No, sorry. I don't know why I do that. Anyway, so all you had to do was watch me make these jokes, and you acquired a little bit, etc. So number 1, it's not difficult. Number 2, language acquisition is involuntary. Ooh. Like it or not, you all just acquired some German. There's nothing you can do about it. It's over. It's too late. Isn't that wonderful? Given comprehensible input, you must acquire. You have no choice. That's the way the brain is made. This is an astonishing fact. It comes from Chomsky's work. I think it applies to language acquisition absolutely everywhere. Okay, that's the comprehension idea. Let me do one more hypothesis, and then we'll have a mini break. I believe in mini breaks. I should tell you why. I am not a morning person. The world is divided into morning people and night people. Did you know that? It's about 50-50. I'll show you. How many of you are morning people? How many of you are night people? Good. Notice I asked the night people second, so they could kind of get the idea a little slow. Night people become addicted to coffee. And coffee needs to be regularly recycled. So we will have a very short break soon, and it will end when the lines in the bathroom are gone. It should take about 5 minutes. Men, if you finish early, you know what to do. Liberate the men's room so we can get back to work. One more hypothesis. I'll give you the updated version of it. I think now, this is conjecture, but I suspect that it's true, that language acquisition requires that input be interesting. That's obvious. If it's not interesting, no one's going to pay attention. You won't acquire. But we now think it has to be more than that. We think now it has to be very interesting. The word I like is compelling. So interesting that you forget you're listening to another language. This is a concept borrowed from a psychologist named Csikszentmihalyi. No, I will not spell it for you. I-T-F-O-R-Y-O-U. No, I won't spell it for you. But it's from his book called Flow, F-L-O-W, which is a wonderful book. It's amazing. He says when you're in a state of flow, only the activity exists. Your sense of self exists, is diminished. Your sense of time is diminished. There's only the activity. He and his colleagues have done research all over the world on what are flow activities. My favorite study was done in Japan and Tokyo, where they looked at young men who liked to ride their motorcycles through downtown Tokyo at midnight. And why did they do it? Their hypothesis was that they did it to impress the girls. Turned out that was supported. But they also said, when I'm on the motorcycle, that's all that exists. I'm not thinking of who I am. Time stands still. This is what we're aiming for. Input that's so interesting you're in flow. I'll give you a case history that started me thinking about it. This was presented to me by my former student and now colleague, Christy Lau, who works in the San Francisco area. And this is about her son. We call him Paul in the paper we wrote about him. Paul is now a teenager, kind of entering college, nice young man. He grew up bilingual Cantonese English. Christy and her husband are both from the Hong Kong area, and her parents lived with them, and grandparents, and they spoke Cantonese. So Paul grew up comfortably bilingual Cantonese and English. Well, when he was young, Christy and her husband were really working hard, and they occasionally had to hire a babysitter. The babysitter would come over, turn on the television to Mandarin cartoons. Now, you know this. Most of the public doesn't know. Mandarin and Cantonese are different languages. They're not both dialects of Chinese. They're really different. There's some shared vocabulary. They're related. It's kind of like Romanian and Spanish. You know one, it will help you a little, but it's not a guarantee. So the Cantonese that he knew did help Paul a little bit in watching the cartoons. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. The babysitter would come over, turn on the TV to Mandarin cartoons. Paul could understand them for several reasons, little bits. His shared vocabulary, the wonderful high quality of children's cartoons. I think most of them are just sensational. I sometimes watch them on the airplane, even when my grandchildren aren't around. I think they're so good. So gradually he would see the same cartoons over and over again, and gradually grew to understand them. My favorite, two favorites, SpongeBob. Oh, you ever watch SpongeBob? Every episode is good, every single one. I worry about Mr. Crab, though. Mr. Crab is a crab. The restaurant he owns, the Krabby Patty, sells crab sandwiches. This isn't right. They need to look into this. Okay. Anyway, you want another off the topic? My favorite children's cartoon, even better than SpongeBob. Have you ever watched Regular Show? Wow. Okay, I'll just leave that as a recommendation. It is really amazing. Anyway, eventually he could understand children's TV in Mandarin. As he got older, he started watching it. In high school, Dad would bring home 2 movies every weekend in Mandarin, and the family would watch them. In the evening, the family would get together, Grandma, Grandpa, everybody, and watch the news in Mandarin. Today, as a young man, Paul speaks Mandarin. When company comes over and they're Mandarin speakers, he has no problem. The family has visited Taiwan. They've gone to Beijing, Shanghai, all these Mandarin places. He's comfortable, no problem at all. He speaks Mandarin quite well. Paul doesn't care about Mandarin. He's neutral. There's this movement among Chinese that Mandarin is our common language. We should all do Mandarin to bond together, honor the culture. He doesn't care. He's not for it. He's not against it. He doesn't care about Mandarin. He is interested in the TV programs. He liked the stories. Acquiring Mandarin was an accidental byproduct of getting compelling, comprehensible input. It's the compelling input that counts. Motivation doesn't matter. I am pronouncing the death of the concept of motivation. We've all had this experience, or my language teacher friends tell me this, like they teach Spanish in middle school, and they tell the kids, you know, you really should pay attention in Spanish class. Someday, Spanish is going to be very useful to you. 9-year-old kids, they don't care. They want to go skateboarding or whatever, okay? Tell them a good story, and they will acquire the language whether they're interested in it or not. In 2 days, Benico Mason's going to talk about how to do that. So here's my conclusion so far. What we want to do is fill our classes with compelling, comprehensible input, and we've got it made. I will summarize this way. Language acquisition requires input that is comprehensible and interesting, and we hope compelling. We want both of those. That's hard to do. That's the job of language teaching. People like me at the university have come up with this, all the research that you just heard about, but our job was easy. It's easy to state the theory and get results. Doing this in class, how do you make input comprehensible and compelling at low levels especially? That's difficult, and that's why Dr. Mason is here. It's easy to give students input that is comprehensible but not interesting. That's called school. It's also easy to give people input that's not comprehensible, but it's interesting. We do this all the time and just talk. And my colleagues at the university have dedicated years to providing us with input that is neither comprehensible nor interesting, in my opinion. Anyway, let's take a 5-minute break, no more. Would you mind trying to raise your hand and make this sign? Can you do this? Now, you know what this is, right? It's actually several things, and I want to give you some background. And this is usually the only thing from my talks that people remember. It's from Star Trek, right? It's from Vulcan, the planet Vulcan, and it's the symbol for live long and prosper, right? Well, the teenagers on Vulcan don't do this. The teenagers just do this and they say, prosper, man, prosper. Anyway, number 2, who introduced it into Star Trek? Leonard Nimoy himself. He brought it in. Where did he get it? He got it from the synagogue. Now, what you should also know, this is very important, is that Leonard Nimoy goes to the same synagogue that my dear Uncle Boris went to, which means we're connected. The way this is done in Judaism, on the most holy day, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, where you fast all day, a member of the priestly caste, a Kohen it's called, anyone whose last name is Cohen is probably a member of the Kohen class, priestly caste, does this symbol in front of the Torah, in front of the Old Testament, in front of the Bible. Okay, so Leonard Nimoy is Jewish. What you don't know is that Spock is Jewish. I have the evidence. Now, in Judaism, religion goes through the mother. It's matriarchal. Spock's father is from Vulcan. His mother from Earth, from Boston. A nice Jewish family. So Spock is Jewish. Got that, Jerry? Okay, Spock is Jewish. Not only is Spock Jewish, William Shatner is Jewish. You know, Captain Kirk? My daughter, who is also Jewish, says that for her, Star Trek is Jews in space. Okay, that'll be the next series, Jews in space. Another part of this you should know, this is my hypothesis. Some of you can do this easily, some of you have a little trouble. My hypothesis is people who can do this easily generally are those who've played the piano. Got it? I will write 3 journal papers based on this. It'll be good for my career. Okay, I want to add some more to what I said this in the first segment. I want to add some more to the comprehension hypothesis. I want to add some corollaries to the hypothesis. Corollary number 1, kind of surprising. Talking is not practicing. Talking is not practicing. Talking is the result of comprehensible input of language acquisition, not the cause. We have many cases showing this is true. You don't have to talk to acquire a language. In fact, it doesn't help or hurt. It doesn't matter. It's the result. I want to give you one case history that makes this point. We have a lot of, complicated research showing this is true, but I want to give you a case history, and I like this case history. It's something that happened to me, but the same thing has happened to you. So it's a universal experience. My version of it took place in the 1970s when we were living in New York. It was my first academic job. I was director of ESL at Queens College, as I told you. We, like everyone else in New York, we lived in a big apartment building. And the apartment across the way from us was owned by a Japanese company. And every year there was a new family in the apartment. And every year there were the children who couldn't speak English. And there I was, director of ESL, with my PhD from UCLA. Very S-M-A-R-T. I will teach English to these children and brag about it to my friends. So let me tell you, this was in the 70s. I didn't know about this stuff then. This stuff we got kind of in the middle and late 70s. I thought then, I had a PhD in linguistics. I knew nothing. I thought then the way you teach language is you get people to talk and you correct their mistakes. Turns out that's dead wrong, but that's what we all thought. So next door was a little girl, the family, Itomi, 4 years old. Gosh, she's probably a great-grandmother by now. Anyway, and I wanted to help her learn English. So I tried to get her to talk. I'd come up to her and say, Itomi, good morning. No response. Itomi, say hi, hello. No response. Obviously, I've got to make it more concrete. Itomi, say ball. Here's a ball. No answer. Well, clearly I've got to break it down into its component parts. Let's work on initial consonants. He told me, say, ba, look at my lips, no response. Well, there's a theory going around then that's come back. And the theory is children don't want to learn language. You've got to force them into it. In fact, the theory today is that children don't want to learn anything. And the theory today is that children are lazy and evil, which is why we have to test them all the time. And teachers are lazy and evil, so we have to force them to work. None of that's true, of course. So I used that. I said, I won't give you the ball until you say ball. No matter what I said, he told me didn't speak. She didn't say anything the first week, the second week, the third week, the first month, 5 months until she started to speak. Actually, that's not entirely true. Children during this time do say certain things that it's not real language, they pick it up from the other kids in the neighborhood, things like leave me alone, get out of here. One child I knew, the only thing he could say was, I kick your ass. Wasn't quite sure what it meant, right, exactly. After about 5 months, he told me started to speak, and several things were interesting about her language acquisition. First, it looked a lot like first language. 1 word, 2 words, gradually getting more complicated. The same process our children went through. Second, it came quickly. By the time Itomi and her family went back to Japan at the end of the year, she had made enormous progress in conversational English. What was going on during those first 5 months? She was listening. She was picking out comprehensible input. Big sentence coming up. When she started to speak, it was not the beginning of her language acquisition. It was the result of all the comprehensible input she had gotten over those few months. She was going through a silent period. You'd like to have a silent period, wouldn't you? How about you go to a class to decide you're going to get some knowledge of Lakota, so you go to Lakota class. And in this perfect class, you don't have to say anything. Isn't that wonderful? You can talk all you want, but no one's going to call on you. And also, if the input isn't comprehensible, it's the teacher's fault, not yours. That's how we're doing it today. And the results we're getting, as you'll see, are much better than the other methods. Okay, so that's number 1. Number 2, corollary number 2. This one goes back to the natural order hypothesis. Let's say we acquire language in a predictable order. Rule 1, Rule 2, Rule 3, all the way up to Rule 6,891. I just made that up. The question of language acquisition, how do we go from Rule 1 to Rule 2? How do we move from what we know now to the next one? Well, the answer is you get input you understand that contains the next rule that you're ready for. I confused everybody in the field back in the 1970s, which was a very good career move. The way to get ahead in the language field, probably any field, I'll give you the secret. Make up new terminology. Make up new terminology. People think it was all your idea. You get the credit for it. And make sure the terminology is not entirely clear. Make sure it's a little bit confusing and people think you're a lot smarter than they are. I've done this accidentally and it's been great. I made up this terminology in the 70s, and when people meet me, they say, what was that? Okay, gosh, he must be very smart. Well, here's the terminology. I said then that if the rule you know now is at I get the term from algebra. My son's a mathematician. It's really cool. How do you go to the next one, I plus 1? Well, the answer is not teach I plus 1. We don't teach along the natural order. Here is the fantastic hypothesis that I came up riding on the Pomona Freeway in 1976, and it suddenly hit me. I had to pull off the road and write it down and do deep breathing for a while because it was so exciting. Give people lots of comprehensible input that is compelling. The next rule they're ready for, I+1, is there. Don't worry. Nutrition. When you have lunch, you don't go to lunch and think, well, you know, I really need some more calcium, some vitamin B3, and selenium, so I'll order this. You don't do that. You simply get what we call a balanced diet, lots of good food, et cetera, and then lots of coffee. And all the vitamins you need are there in the right order, and they naturally are combined with the things they should be combined with, and you get them again and again as you need them. The same with language acquisition. Our conclusion, don't worry about grammar teaching. Give people the comprehensible input they need, and language is acquired. All the rules, you get them naturally. So that's the second major corollary. Another fact I'd like to present to you, which will help me talk about case histories. Language acquisition is gradual. It's gradual. You get a little bit at a time. The best example is vocabulary. A guy named Twaddell wrote a brilliant article years ago, 1973. Such a nice quote, I put it on your handout. Acquisition of vocabulary is a little bit at a time. We may know a very large number of words with various degrees of vagueness in a twilight zone between the darkness of unfamiliarity and the brightness of complete familiarity. This was confirmed about 15 years ago by brilliant researchers at the University of Illinois. They did studies and they found that when you're reading or listening and there's a word that you don't know, but the context is comprehensible, you get a little bit of it. Each time you see the word or you hear the word, you get about 5%, maybe 10%. That may not seem like very much, but if you get enough input, that's more than enough. They looked at reading. They calculated that if fifth grade children read about 1 million words a year and they get 5% of a new word each time, this accounts for vocabulary growth. It's not all at once. As soon as you finish the lesson, you don't know that word. You've simply made a little bit of progress, making it more familiar on the road to acquisition. So many of us, I'll talk about later, I'm studying Mandarin now. It's so much fun. Oh, and it's so slow. It's amazing. There are lots of words usually when I meet a Mandarin speaker and I plunge into Chinese, they just stare at me. Okay? I can't get those people to understand their own language. What's wrong with them? Anyway, and what's the frustrating thing is there are all these words I think I know, but I can't quite come out with them. They're kind of there, and I can't quite grab them. Keep reading and listening. They'll be there. That's the moral behind that. It comes gradually, not all at once. What I'd like to do now is go to case histories to illustrate what I've just talked about, the idea of comprehension, silent period, etc. And I want to say a word about case histories. It's one of many ways we do research. I think it's a wonderful way. The trick with case histories, speaking to you as a research person, you got to look at a lot of them. You can't just look at one or two. If you look at one or two, you don't know what's significant. Like someone will tell me, my cousin learned to speak French and all he did was memorize the dictionary. That's one case history. You got to take a bigger look, see what else he did, and look at other case histories. So we've looked at hundreds, and I'm giving you a few examples. The first one was a case I got to see up close. I got a call from the Los Angeles Times, this is about 20 years ago, and the reporter was doing a study of immigrants from Mexico to the Southern California area who acquired English but also acquired other languages at the same time. And these are usually people who work in restaurants. He wanted me to come out and meet a guy named Armando at a restaurant in the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles, an Israeli restaurant owned by Moroccan Jews who settled in Israel. And Armando had acquired Hebrew. How do you like that? As well as English. He came to the United States in his late teens, having had 4th, 5th grade education in Mexico, started to work in the restaurant, had been there about 10 years, and his Hebrew was pretty good. In fact, the first thing I did is I tested him, of course. We had things called tape recorders then. You may have heard of those. And we had a conversation. I had a conversation with him, his best buddy, member of the family, and we talked about what did you do yesterday, which was the Sabbath. And we had this nice conversation in Hebrew. They did fine without me. I pushed them along a little bit. I took the tape the next day, and I took it to the Israeli embassy and the Israeli tourist office. And I asked two people to listen to the conversation. What did they think of Armando? How do you like this guy, his Hebrew? One person said, he's pretty good. He's lived in Israel for maybe 2-3 years, and he's become very functional in Hebrew. It's not the highest, most sophisticated, there's a lot of slang, but he's quite impressive. Another person thought he was fluent, and he was from Ethiopia. Another one thought he was very, very good, and Hebrew is a second language, and he's obviously Moroccan. Well, that's the rest of it. The fourth person thought he was a native speaker. So you get from very good to native. This guy had done it. I talked to him. How did you do this? First of all, he didn't say anything for the first 2-3 years. He just listened. He was not getting a lot of comprehensible input. So this is like my neighbor Itomi next door, listening to a lot of incomprehensible input. Gradually it filters out. Did he get corrected? He said yes, but only on vocabulary, not on grammar. How about grammar itself? Did you study Hebrew grammar? Never. You know, when you said this, when he repeated a sentence, he used, did you know that was the future tense? He says, I have no idea. But it was perfect. He got it right. Everything was fine. Never learned to read in Hebrew. No interest in converting to Judaism. No interest in living in Israel, but very well integrated into the community. You meet this guy. I was very impressed with him. You sit down. It was like meeting Jerry, okay? My buddy. This guy is okay. You talk to him. He's interesting. There's no barrier. That's the way it was. Easy, friendly person. The family loved him. He was in an automobile accident. While he was in the hospital, every day the family from the restaurant would send over breakfast, lunch, and dinner. He knew the family. He knew the customers, he knew all the workers, and chatted easily with them in Hebrew all the time. He integrated into the local community. My bitterness about this, though, the reporter did not include my analysis in the newspaper article. I could have had a career. I could have had a name for myself, but I published my own incomprehensible paper about him. I got my revenge. Other areas that come out with similar ideas. Moving on to the next page. We have been told by anthropologists, one named Jane Hill especially, that we shouldn't just look at, the people we see in language classes, people around us, but we should look at a lot of different situations. And she relied on the work of an anthropologist named Sorensen, who looked at Native American languages in the Valpes River area between Brazil and Colombia. This was done in the 1960s, and there's several papers about these people. Really interesting. 10,000 people in a small area that speak 24 different languages. Wow. I mean, there are 10,000 people at a baseball game. 24 different languages. They had a very interesting rule. You may not marry someone who speaks your language. They regard outsiders as incestuous. We marry people who speak our own language, okay? So as someone is growing up, they pick up their mom's language, their dad's language, and the local common language of the inner community, the larger language. And as they grow up, they're adding languages the whole time, constantly. It's about a year or two until they start to speak. We see this constant all the time. It takes a while. They go through a silent period. They don't study. They don't speak until they feel ready. The languages are not all related. Some of them are, some of them are not, and this doesn't hold them back. Also, they're very modest about their claims. As you see, this is common to many Native American cultures. They don't brag about how well they speak the language. They're very modest, they understate their accomplishments, but it's obvious that they get pretty good. It is considered impolite and uncomfortable to correct somebody. Correction, we think, does not have that big of an impact. It's the comprehensible input. So here's another case that fits right in. Let me give you the opposite. Daniel Tammet. Daniel Tammet is a case of Asperger, a form of autism. Oh, I can get rid of these scratchings. He wrote a book about it, which I read, which is a very good book, called Born on a Blue Sunday, on a Blue Day. And he was featured in a special in the UK on television called Brain Man. He has acquired 10 languages. I would say acquired and learned. But let me tell you what kind of a brain he has as a victim of what we call savant syndrome or Asperger's. He has an incredible power of memorizing. By the way, I highly recommend his book. It's a very insightful, sensitive book about his life. It's really quite something. Anyway, to show you what kind of a memory, as he did this stunt for charity, did it on television, he memorized pi to 20,000 places. Can you imagine? He holds the British and European record for memorizing pi. The world record is someone in China who has memorized it to 60,000 places. It takes days to recite it. He did it for charity, so it's all in a good cause. This is the kind of memory. By the way, if you want to work on your career a little bit, you can get lots of fame this way with pi. There's a website. If you memorize pi to 20 places and have someone witness it, they will list you on the website. I can do it to 20. When people ask me what my code number is, I tell them it's the last 4 digits of pi. It's always, or the middle 4, you can do that too. Okay. Anyway, he has done these languages, and it's clear in his book when he talks about how he did it, that he does both acquisition and learning. I've got some quotes here. Lithuanian. I wrote words down as I learned them to help me remember them, conscious learning, and I read children's books. In other words, comprehensible input. Icelandic. For this TV show, he learned Icelandic in 10 days. And on TV, he had conversations with native speakers and was quite comfortable. Okay? What did he do? He had a teacher check pronunciation, conscious learning, but the large amount of reading helped me develop an intuitive sense of the language's grammar. That's acquisition. So he did both. He was asked, what would you do if you started a new language? Oh yeah, I'd have a dictionary, grammar books, all these things, but lots of texts. I prefer to learn words within whole sentences to give me a feeling of how the language works. Again, both of them. He has a system that he's put on the internet, I haven't looked at it in a long time, of teaching people languages. It's clearly both acquisition and learning. There's a grammatical focus, and there's practice, and there's reading and input. So is the conclusion we should combine both and do a balanced program? No. This is Daniel Tammet, who memorized pi to 20,000 places. These are the people who can learn grammar, not us. I want to, in the 9.6 minutes remaining to me, I would like to talk about a couple more cases. I was invited to a conference 2.5 weeks ago, which I went to in Montreal. It was a conference dedicated to hyper-polyglots. People there knew lots of languages. The guy who invited me, I mentioned him before, Steve Kaufman, knows 15 languages, okay? I was the least talented person there, or the least accomplished. And I'm not bad, I'm pretty good in lots of languages. These people, 10, 12, 15 languages, and they were so interesting. If another person came who knew more languages than they did, they said, wow, I want to be like you when I grow up. It was like that. I want to tell you about 2 cases of hyperpolyglots, Lom Kato and Steve Kaufman, and make the point that this supports the theory. I met Lom Kato in Hungary 22 years ago. I was giving a short course at the university in Page for 2 weeks. And while I was there, one of my students said, "You should meet Lomkato. She is a national treasure. She is the world's greatest polyglot, 17 languages. And if you want to meet her, you better hurry. She's 86. So made an appointment. My student called up Lomkato. "Professor Krashen is here from California, would like to meet you." And Lomkato said, "So what?" And we had a meeting. Wow, I made 3 trips to Budapest just to see her and talk to her. My student had read her book, which was written in Hungarian. She was the real thing. She did all of her language acquisition in Hungary, she didn't grow up multilingual. She grew up monolingual Hungarian. She got interested in her 20s. That's when she started. She got interested in French. She finished her PhD in chemistry at the university I was teaching at in Page, and then decided to start teaching French. She got interested in French. She kept one lesson ahead of her students, did the same thing with English. She became an interpreter and translator. That's where she did it. Her main source of input, reading. She would find a book in another language and keep reading it until she got it. Kind of awkward. I told her what we did, that we have all these, you'll find out when Dr. Mason gives her talk, graded readers, etc. She said, "Oh, if I had that, it would have been so much easier." She was a little nervous about her Spanish. She said the only book she could find in Spanish was a translation from English, "Gentlemen Prefer Blondes." She and her family moved, she did Russian during the Nazi occupation of Budapest, when it was forbidden by law to speak Russian in public. That's when she did Russian. She moved into an apartment that was abandoned by a Russian family. They left all these romance novels in Russian. She read them all. By the way, when Steve Kaufman gave his talk, he asked all these hyper-polyglots, "How many of you grew up with more than one language?" About a third. 2/3 of them did it the way Lomkato did and the way Steve Kaufman did. Steve Kaufman grew up monolingual English in Montreal. He had a little French in school, but never paid attention. He then had 3 years in France. He then had a long stretch in Japan, where he worked as a lumber salesman and eventually for the Canadian government. But the other languages he did on his own, with classes, teachers, creating materials, and did it later in life. Let me tell you what they said. Number 1, they agree, find compelling input. Kaufman said the best things in the Mandarin classes he took was when he and the teachers would sit around and just talk. That was the most interesting. I did Hebrew in a special intensive Hebrew program in Israel, in what we call an Ulpan work-study program. And the first 3 hours each day was regular Hebrew instruction, contextualized grammar. It wasn't that bad because the teacher was very entertaining. But the last half hour, she told Bible stories. No interest in grammar. And she did it in simple Hebrew, and we were captivated because she always had a new twist on what was going on in the stories. That's when it happened. We forgot we were listening to Hebrew. Lomkato says the books did it for her. They were compelling. She plunged into them. A character's fate becomes the reader's fate. Genuine readers sail with Robinson Crusoe, throw themselves under the train with Anna Karenina, die of tuberculosis with the Lady of the Camellias. Afterward, luckily, they come back to life. Okay. So compelling input. Okay, grammar. Steve says, sometimes I look at grammar books, but I forget the rules right away. And it was only through exposure to language that I mastered the grammar. I love this next one. I deliberately ignored explanations of the theory of Chinese grammar because they made no sense to me. Instead, I just accepted the various structure patterns of sentences in Chinese as normal. This is brilliant. I regard Steve Kaufman as my therapist in languages. All his experiences, he knew about my theory before he met me. This is all on his own. And he has all this good practical advice. He found it was easier to learn a structure from exposure to phrase patterns than understanding the grammatical explanations. This one I should put on my wall. Do not spend your time in a vain attempt to master the language from grammar rules and lists. You will not enjoy this tedious form of study, and it will not work. These are the masters. These are the greatest polyglots in the world. What lets you avoid mistakes is not grammar rules, but seeing it, hearing it, etc. I asked Lom Kato about teaching grammar to adults. She said, it's okay, make it optional, and only include the simplest of forms. The world's greatest polyglot of her time, when asked, should we teach grammar to children, she said, the concept of teaching grammar to children is absurd. Who are you going to believe? Lom Kato, a genius, or so-called professional textbook writers, most of whom have never spent a day alone in a room with 10-year-old children? Error correction. Lom Kato, error correction can make you sick to your stomach. Wow. She was at a conference translating from English, from another language into English. And it was a conference on chemistry, and she had her PhD in chemistry. She made a slip of the tongue. Instead of saying inorganic, she said unorganic. She said, my chief rival haughtily corrected me. I was lost for the rest of the day. Now, if that happens to Lom Kato, who has lots of self-esteem and confidence, I spent hours with her, what about our 11-year-old kids? First exposure to the language. Correction can be devastating. On the other hand, I've got to say for full disclosure, uncorrected mistakes are very perilous. You keep saying it wrong, they take root in the mind. I don't know if that's true. I think if you keep getting more input, our data says a lot of them gradually go away. When you're reading, should you know every word? No. This is liberating. Kaufman, I heard him say this in public too. Expect to forget whatever you look up in a dictionary pretty quickly. He says when he's reading, if he looks up something in the dictionary, he forgets what the word is by the time he's gone back to the text. Doesn't that make you feel better? I mean, this happens to me all the time. She says, Lom Kato says, don't get obsessed with words you don't know. Focus on passages and sections that you do understand. And that's how you improve. Don't force it. Don't automatically reach for the dictionary. This next one helped me, Steve. Don't worry about perfection. You'll often feel you're struggling, when in fact you're communicating quite successfully. Do not think your grammar and pronunciation are being judged. Your listeners don't care. They want to understand you. This took me a long time. Not only was I embarrassed when I made a mistake, feeling that people would be insulted, but I wanted applause whenever I got anything right. If I made the past participle agree with, and gender and number, I wanted people to just stop and say, oh, isn't he terrific? They don't care. People are listening to what you say. Lom Kato, language is the only thing worth knowing even poorly. Wow. Propagation of half-truths is not an advancement of science, but a hindrance, Mr. Trump. For the language learner, however, it would be a pity to fall silent if you don't know with certainty whether the form will hit home or not. Kaufman helped me 2.5 weeks ago. I told you about the problems I've been having. Problems. They're not problems, it's the process with Mandarin, where I get frustrated because I know I've seen the word, I know I would recognize the meaning, but I can't quite come up with it, so I can't really use it. And that gets frustrating. He says, this is normal. Don't worry about it. Keep reading, keep listening. When he said that in Montreal, that night I went back to Mandarin, I did reading and listening for 45 minutes, and I felt a lot better, okay? I did it yesterday too. Trust the process. Don't worry about perfection. The great British actor, what's his name? Senior moment. Who's the most famous British actor? Laurence Olivier, thanks. Said, don't worry about perfection. When you get there, nobody's going to notice, okay? Same thing with language. Language works even if only poorly. I'm going to come now to glorious conclusions. Very simple on the bottom of the page. The answer is comprehensible input, interesting, even compelling input, and another word that Benico Mason and I have been talking about, rich input. Input that contains all the grammar you need just because there's so much of it, and input that is fascinating, that adds depth and interest to the topic you're talking about. Language acquisition is easy, inevitable, it is our birthright, and all these polyglots agree with me. There's no talent for languages. We all have it. When I was in Budapest, in Hungary, I kind of showed off and told people that I knew Lomkato. I had meetings with the Budapest grammarians, with the linguistics professors. You know, they invited me to lunch, to coffee, etc. I gave a talk at university in Budapest. And in casual conversation, I'd say, you know, I've been hanging out with Lomkato. I must be an important person, right? And they all said, oh, her. None of them took her seriously. They all said, she has a different brain. A different brain? Does she have 3 hemispheres? I mean, what do you mean, a different brain? No. Lomkato denies it, Steve Kaufman denies it, and it was a steady topic of conversation among the hyper-polyglots. By the way, Benico, I'm still in touch with the hyper-polyglots. On Twitter, we still exchange things all the time. None of them know about research. They're not researchers, they're not teachers, but wow, do they have interesting ideas. They all agree there's no special talent. What it is trusting the process, being patient, know that it's an uneven path toward improvement. It'll seem uneven, but hang with it. Anybody can do it. I'm done. Please burst into wild applause. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much.